Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Guys on Sports. It's me, it's Rocky. We're gearing up here for the NFL draft. We're about, 3-4 weeks out. In the meantime, we're going to be giving you some 101 on draft strategies for Dynasty Leagues, redraft, also best ball. But this week, we're going to be talking Dynasty 101. We're going to give you basically everything you need to know if this is your first time playing Dynasty, how it differs from your redraft, what questions you need to ask, what you need to look out for, basically everything you need to know to go into your draft and be ready to take down your friends in whatever league you're in. We're going to do that here. Next week, we're going to follow this up with our Dynasty mock draft. So to give you a chance to look at the strategies we talk about here and then see us enact them in real time and see how that draft falls so you can kind of get an idea of players' values going in. Rocky, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great.
Great.
Ready for the draft.
To hear.
Doing a lot of research, and this is my favorite time of year.
It's a good time.
Yeah, rookies. I like checking out the rookies, seeing which ones may have impact, and it leads right into our discussion today about dynasty drafts.
Yeah, and Rocky's he loves watching the college game and kind of guys coming up through the ranks.
I love young men.
It's important. He loves young men. Look, it's important because I'm a guy that I like to pay attention to the pros a lot more. I focus in a little bit more on the college players once we get around NFL draft time, and then start definitely leading into our personal leagues and any other money leagues that we're in. I'll take a closer look, but maybe you're a guy like me, and it's important to kind of hone in on that and learn what to look for. I'm sure Rocky could give you some tips on that as we go through it. So we'll start off the top, and I'm going to give you a list of things here. Rocky, you jump in whenever you want. Number one thing you want to find out, you're going into a Dynasty League this year. It's your first year. You got invited in. There's some particulars you need to know. You're going to want to find out, what is the roster size? A roster size, as you know, can differ quite a bit from a redraft. Rocky, why don't you give us an idea of what you're looking at on a Dynasty League roster as far as how many spots, what you're carrying on that team, etc.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me, and every league is going to have a little bit of differences here and there. So first thing I want to know is what's the makeup? How many QBs am I starting? Is it a league where it's 3 wide receivers and a tight end, or 2 wide receivers or a wide receiver tight end? I'm just looking at the makeup of the team, and especially if it's a 2-quarterback league, that changes everything as far as the importance.
Not to cut you off, I did some research this week, is the most common Dynasty format right now. Another big thing is your bench is quite a bit larger. You're going to carry more players. Some leagues even have a taxi squad, which is essentially, if you're watching ball, is your practice squad, where guys that you can keep there, you can elevate them, but typically you can't put them back down onto that list, and you have to make room for them on your roster. So super important to find out the size of your roster, how many positions you can hold if there's a limit, how many positions you're going to start. Is there just one flex? Is there a flex and a super flex? All those things are super important because you need to strategize in a different way than you're used to with your redraft, right? So different things are going to have value based on what that roster looks like. If there's 2 QBs, like you were saying, quarterback becomes way more valuable than it is in your redraft. It's a whole different world
for quarterbacks, for sure.
Yeah, and then so I think the next thing you want to talk about is this a true dynasty? Is this a contract dynasty? Rocky, why don't you explain what a contract dynasty league is to anybody out there that hasn't played in it?
Right, and so Dynasty League comes in all different flavors. Both of our leagues that we're in, the league of records for our show, are Dynasty contract leagues. And so we're able to not only draft or pick up free agents, but you're assigning them to a certain number of years. So both of our leagues, we have so many players that we can sign to 4-year leagues. Four-year contracts, and then you can sign them to 3, 2, or 1-year contracts. And each one of them in our leagues have a penalty. So if I sign a guy to a 4-year contract and I cut him, I might end up having to eat that contract for the entire 4 years. And so I want to be really cognizant of what that looks like, et cetera.
Yeah, and so the reason it's important to find that out is because you may be in a standard dynasty league. In a standard dynasty league, you're going to keep all your players. They won't leave your team until you trade or
Right.
you cut them.
That's
right? The only new players you're going to be getting in your dynasty draft are your rookies if you're in a standard league. So key differences here. Let's go with our standard dynasty league. That means a dynasty league without contracts involved. Every season, you're going to draft rookies. You're going to have an initial draft where you draft your whole team. That team is your roster until you cut players or trade them away. The only new players you get going forward are going to be rookies. Now, in opposition of that, in a contract league, you're going to get new players because you will be able to bid on them in whatever format that your league allows you to get players that are coming off of those said contracts, right, Rocky?
Yeah.
And then get your rookies as well.
Right.
So that creates a little bit different dynamic, right?
Yep. Well, and I think you too, and of course we're different a little bit in how we think. Mm-hmm. Even within that type of league, there are people that are going to highly focus on rookies, mm-hmm. and there's going to be people that are looking more for higher end free agents. And then I think it's also kind of like, what is your strategy? What is the makeup of your team? If you're starting from scratch and you're getting to draft a team along with every other team, or if you're buying into a dynasty league where you're having to take over a team, that also can change what your strategy is.
And it's super important if you're going to be able to change that roster or not. So, again, questions you need to ask. Roster size, position limits.
Well, and is it a defense? Like, do you have any defensive players or not?
Defensive player, yeah. What positions do I start? How many of each position? And you want to know if it's a contract league or a traditional dynasty.
Yeah.
All things you need to get out of the way. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that you need to ask as far as it pertains to dynasty. Obviously, if there's any penalties or little rules about cutting and adding players, it works differently than most redraft as well.
One thing you want to find out, too, is some leagues. In fact, I'm in one league where your roster size is 40, which is ridiculous, but you're also able to carry a 10-person taxi squad. And so a lot of times, because in this league, you're picking every game, you're starting 9 defensive players. You might pick up defensive players, stash them on your taxi squad. They're not ready to start. But there's a lot to think about. Neither of our leagues of record have taxi squads. So if you're drafting a rookie, they have to kind of produce sooner rather than later.
So you're perfect. You're segueing me into my next little diatribe here. There's 2 main ways to go about your strategizing in Dynasty. I'm not going to say which one I think is best, at least not yet, right? But if you follow football or you follow any professional sport, being a Dynasty owner in fantasy is very similar in certain ways. It's going to give you the ability to build a team in the makeup that you want because you have more control. It's going to allow you to strategize whether you want to play for long term, if you want to go all in. Do you want to give up assets to try to win in the here and now? Do you want to expend your draft capital to do that here and now? Do you want to extend it and increase your chances down the road to be more of a perennial contender with less boom or bust thing? There's so many different ways to go, and that's kind of your choice on what you want to do. But what I want you to kind of answer for me, Rocky, is how do you balance the immediate future, the immediate future and versus future production? So it's like, well, number one, how do you think people should balance it, and how do you personally go about it?
So, I think this is a great question. Again, I think you have to, am I starting a league from scratch, or am I joining a league? Am I already in a league?
Let's go with, we probably have to do a separate episode for the 2 types, but Let's go with you're starting the league with your friends. You haven't played Dynasty. It's a fresh new league. How do you build that team if we have contracts?
Yeah. So I'm going to liken it to, and this will maybe bore some of our listeners, but one of my favorite techniques in investing money is I will look for 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, 12-month CDs that tend to get higher interest rates than like a regular savings account. And then when the 3-month comes up, I'm looking for a 12-month so that I always in my portfolio have 3, 6, 9, 12-month. I take the same strategy in football. So I'm going to draft an immediate quarterback that I think is going to be really good. So for instance, this year, if I'm looking at rookies, I'm going to probably draft a Cam Ward who I think is probably going to start day one and he's going to produce immediately. But I'm also going to probably mix in a Tyler Shuck or a Will Howard who I think has potential at quarterback, but I'm going to stash him and see if he develops. So that's kind of like for me in all positions. I might be looking at, like last year, I was looking to pick up a Jacobs, right, who I knew was going to be a consistent, great running back, or maybe a Joe Mixon, and also looking for a Chase Brown, who I thought was a running back that had potential to hit. So I don't know if that answers
No,
your
it did
question.
answer. I'm just wondering, like, so you're saying you kind of like to balance.
Yeah, I like a little bit of both.
All right. So,
This is if I'm starting from scratch. You know.
okay. So let's say now you're coming into it in already established league. You have a roster. There are contracts that are expiring. You have contracts on board, and you got all your rookie picks. How do you go about that? Let's say you're trying to compete this year.
Yeah.
What would you do in that situation?
So in that situation, I'm probably I'm not going to be real rookie focused. I'm not going to be I'm not going to take a rookie I don't think is going to produce immediately, and I'm probably looking to like combine picks for a sure starter or a starter with a very high floor.
In the rookie draft, or are you saying just?
Oh, I'm saying I'm sorry. I didn't catch you. You're saying rookie draft.
I'm saying for both. So you're saying you're going to combine.
Yeah. So like this year, if I'm going in, I think I have a pretty solid team, but I think I'm lacking at quarterback. I'm probably going to try to combine a wide receiver and a running back that I think are good but not great and try to pick up a great quarterback, trade for a great quarterback, or I'm going to go all in on a free agent quarterback that I think is going to be a game changer. So that might be somebody who's like a Lamar Jackson,
Okay, yeah.
somebody who maybe is a Jalen Hurt, even though I don't think much of him as a real quarterback. I think a lot of him as a fantasy quarterback.
That's fair. I think if you're listening or watching right now, what you're probably picking up on is that there's a lot of different ways to go, which just reiterates what we were saying at the top of the show, is that I think the paramount thing is to ask questions, figure out everything you can about your league.
And about your team.
And
Be
about
honest
your
about your
team.
team.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, but explain what you mean by that before I make my point.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like last year, I was in a rare, weird point where my team was good enough to make the playoffs. But when I looked at my team, I did not think they were good enough to win the entire league. I might get to the playoffs, but I might lose in the first round. And so I try to have a combined approach where I wanted to still get to the playoffs. I still wanted to do well, but I traded off a few assets for future first-round picks because I still didn't feel like my team was good enough to win it all, but so I wanted a combined approach. And so I traded off an older running back for a first-round pick to another playoff team, and I traded for CMC. Mm-hmm. So why did I trade for CMC? He had no input. He was not going to help me that year. I traded for him because I will be able to franchise him next year at a much lower rate. I traded for him paying $140, but next year I'll franchise him at $50. Mm-hmm. And I think he might have one more great season. So it's more of I got a few great draft picks, so I'll pick up a few good rookies. And I've got CMC that I think will put me over the edge this year in that league. Again, it's convoluted, but the reality is if you're just going to kind of half-ass it, you probably want to be in a redraft league.
Yeah, I think you need to, so to your point, yeah, be honest with your team, figure out who's on the roster, what you're doing, pick a strategy, and I think this has to happen season to season. I think leading into your season, you need to figure out what you're doing, and then you may need to reassess at some point during the season. But you need to pick what you're going to do
and stick with it.
Go with it. Because if you don't plan and you start flip-flopping, before you know it, you'll be losing games and you'll be not set up for the following season.
Yeah.
So you need to decide if you're going for it, then you're going into your rookie drafts and maybe you're trading up to get a better rookie, a more prolific rookie, or you're trading back to get a player that you could start this year that's already established, but you're going for it. And you still want to have a measure of balance because you have to compete year to year, but you just need to decide what you're going to do, figure out what your strategy is, pick a week during the season, and base that on another question you need to ask is when is your trade deadline?
Yeah.
And figure out, all right, this is the time I got to look at my team and see where I'm going and then make decisions based on that. Just like you do, all the owners do in your real sports that you watch. They decide whether they're in or they're out, and you go about that according. But I'll get to my next question for both of us, and I think this will let us talk a little bit more about what we believe is Rocky, and for me, what has been your most successful strategy in Dynasty formats, and do you think it would work for everyone?
Yeah, so I think my most successful strategy is that so if I'm in a 12-team league, I'm betting that my knowledge of rookies, my knowledge of the college players is better than anybody else.
Okay.
And that's just, so I'll spend a lot of time doing research, taking those fringe players that I think can actually surprise people. And so a couple of years ago, one of those players was Romeo Doubs. He was selected late in most drafts, but I just looked and knew that he had potential, and so I got him almost for nothing. So I'm going to bet that a little bit. I'm going to bet that I have a better knowledge of rookies. I also like to be making moves around and you mentioned it, the trade deadline. Yeah. I like to be trading off assets that are expiring, and so often I'm going to trade. A couple years ago, I traded Derrick Henry, who I had already franchised. I could not re-sign. Traded him right before the playoffs to another team and got several number one picks. I think that's been a good strategy for me.
Yeah, so I think my strategy is a little different, and the only thing I'll bang back at you for is, and this is what I would caution against with Rocky's strategy, is, there are seasons where, like last season, your team's good enough to get into the playoffs. You don't think they could win, but I think the way I tend to look at it is, if I can get in the playoffs, this is fantasy football.
Who knows?
You don't know. Especially in 12-mans, you're typically looking at maybe 2 weeks of playoffs, depending on your seeding. You could even be looking, I guess in your situation, you're probably looking at 2 playoff weeks and then a championship. Guys get hurt all the time. The guy you're going up against could lose 2 players, lose a player. Guys have a bad week, early injury. I think just getting in the dance is pretty important.
Yeah.
So I tend to look at, if I'm at the trade deadline, I'm not looking at can I win a championship. I'm looking at can I get into the playoffs, because I like to roll the dice. So that goes to my strategy. My strength isn't college players. My strength is I can look into I'm good at looking into numbers.
And I think you're
at
good
pros. Yeah.
I think you're really good at looking at who you think who has potential to break out. So, like, for instance, I thought you picked up a couple running backs last year that weren't there but were close, that actually did pretty well.
Remember. Yeah.
Well, like Tracy, you were high on Tracy.
I was high on Tracy.
Now, he was the rare bird that he was also young.
Yeah.
But I think where you really got into him was when you started watching practice, when you started watching preseason.
Yeah.
I think you did a good job there.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. But what I tend to look at is numbers for the NFL. I'm good at getting into the numbers. So I feel like I know the stuff that I tend to look at. And if you follow and watch the show, I could give you some of those things that I tend to look at. But I have things and, analysts and people I go to. But there's certain stats I look at and that for me are kind of earmarks on where I think a player will go. I heavily focus on those. And I like to invest. And the other thing I do is I look for situations where I can get good players or future assets. So I'm super aggressive with trades. I don't mind trading away future picks. My motto, the way I think is, I'm always getting more the year following. I will always trade a number one pick for a player that could produce for me for a year and a half or two. Like if you give me, I don't know, if you give me Saquon Barkley for a year and a half, I'll trade you my number 2 overall pick, because I look at it like my odds of getting a player that produces as well as he does are pretty low. So the trade-off for a year and a half of that production makes sense in my brain. Now, it might not make sense in Rockies, but I think what's important is that whatever it is that's making sense for you, you have to operate off of that always, or else you wind up trying to do two things at once.
You can't be haphazard. And to me, like if you're selling off, if you don't think your team is good enough, or if you're clearly out of the playoffs, and then your strategy becomes I'm trading everything of value for next year.
Yeah, you got to go.
You got to go for it, because I think fate favors the bold.
Either way, I think it has to work either way.
Now, again, like there's that rare season where, and a lot of fantasy is luck. A lot of it is who stays healthy.
Oh, yeah.
So last year I made it. So you have to be willing to know your strategy, but also deviate real quickly.
If you have to,
Yeah, and so what I did is I recognized, I'm still in this. Like Phil said, I want to try to get to the playoffs. So I made a trade for CMC, who was healthy at the time and who I was thinking would help me that year. The moment that he went back on injured reserve and didn't help me, I quickly switched strategy and I jettisoned another couple players to pick up a few draft picks for the next year. Still made the playoffs, but wasn't strong enough to win the entire league.
Yeah, I think being able to switch is important. So, I know we probably sound like we're contradicting ourselves. We're not. Saying you go in with your plan, stick to your plan. If something arises, if you trade off players like Rocky did, and then you continue to win games, and you see you still have a shot, you have some stuff in the bank that you're able to kind of make a move to get over the top. I guess my difference is I just probably do it at the deadline, because if I'm a game out of the playoffs, I'll probably trade to get in.
Yeah.
I think you would probably say I'm not even in the playoffs right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to trade to get better next year. But I look at it like I'm always looking, well, if I want to pick in the second round next year, I will trade future picks, or I can look at a player and move on from them as well. And sometimes I think you have to be comfortable with what you're doing. You will get ridiculed in your league for making bold moves, no matter which way it is. Sometimes I see a value of a player higher or a lot lower than other people, and I'll make deals based off of that, and some people don't understand. But this all goes into your strategy, your planning, what you think is valuable, what you think is not. Really, the name of the game here is you're trying to beat 11 other teams, and in a league like this, if there's even half of the players are taking it seriously, you're going to have to do a little bit of homework. You're going to have to put a little bit of time in. Well, it's not just picking the best names and slapping them in your lineup like it is most redrafts.
And I think that's a good point, too, is you want to know not only your league, you want to know what your league looks like as far as how many of each position you're starting, but you also want to know your other players. So like one thing that I do is I literally keep a chart of every team in the league. I keep a chart of who their favorite team is. If I know a favorite player, I'll keep that. I try to get some intel. Is this a casual fan or are they not a casual fan? So what I mean by that is a casual fan might fall for a bigger name that's on the decline. So for instance, CMC, who I've mentioned, I'm going to franchise at a lower cost. I might trade CMC to a casual.
Yeah.
Trying to get a couple young players that I think are better or could have a better, longer career. So you have to just know a lot. You really do have to do your research. But I think that's what makes draft dynasty football fun.
It makes it fun because when you win, you really feel like you earned it.
Yeah.
Even though, like you said, a lot of it is luck, but you got to put yourself in the position to be a benefactor of that luck. But I think that's it. I mean, there's a lot more to get into Dynasty. I think we will do further breakdowns where we just go contract dynasty and we go traditional dynasty. We have a lot of time leading up to the season for sure.
Well, I think we're going to do some mock drafts. And again, we'll do several. In fact, we'll probably do one next week.
We are doing one. Yep.
But then we're also going to probably do one immediately after the draft because that changes again.
Yes.
Like because the best rookie going to the worst situation doesn't help. So, for instance, I'm really high on a few wide receivers this year. They're drafted by the Browns. Until I know who their quarterback is,
Yeah, it's tough.
I'm probably not very high on them. And I think you drafted Malik Neighbors in a few drafts, hoping that either Daniel could pull it out or they'd figure out a way to get him the ball. And they did, So.
Yeah, they did, and it just makes you feel good about going forward. But there's a lot. You just got to pay attention. But that's why you stick with us. Next week we're doing a dynasty mock draft. I think we will do that as a fresh one, just to kind of get an idea. And it's important to watch them because you're going to see it before the draft, watch it after the draft to see the way established players' values change based on rookies and situations. And you'll get a bunch of them, but trust me, if you're just learning like some of these different types of leagues, like I said, we'll get into best ball, etc. It's important to kind of get the ins and outs. And we're your guys. We're just regular guys that are playing. We do money leagues. We do our close leagues, friend leagues, family leagues. We do all that stuff. But we're going to give you every ounce of knowledge that we have. We've been doing it quite a long time, and we hope you'll stick with us. Go check out all of our stuff on socials at GNWed Podcast. Like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell if you're watching this on YouTube. If not, go to YouTube. The Guys On Network. Follow us. Guys On Sports. Guys On Draft, which is our other show. And please, please, please show us some love. We need all of it that we can get. We love you. Peace.